Why do generals always lose the new war? They prepare for the past. They ignore costs. Germany started fighting with the finest weapons on earth. Then reality hit. They finished copying cheap British steel tubes. Berlin planners faced sheer psychological shock. Blitzkrieg strategy demanded elite soldiers. It required flawless precision firearms. But long wars demand pure math. Math, not ideals. Arm the masses. Abandon complex engineering. Britain forged over 4 million Stens. The enemy fought a cheap war. They fought what they could afford. Generals watched their vision collapse. Pride meant nothing. Soldiers hated this truth. A Danish mechanic from the Borpa group clamps a steel pipe into the vise of an ordinary bicycle shop. Resistance members across occupied Europe were the first to grasp this deadly arithmetic of cheapness. The underground needed arms quickly. They cut cheap steel tubes and meticulously fitted raw metal parts under the very noses of their military oppressors. It was a daily struggle. Occupied Copenhagen held a population of about 400,000 captive residents. Heavily armed Nazi patrols swarmed the dense city streets constantly. Yet mechanics still managed to manufacture roughly 200 counterfeit submachine guns right in the center. The deliberate, primitive design became the main weapon of the resistance. It allowed rebels to produce lethal firearms without actual factories. The dangerous geography of clandestine weapon production expanded rapidly. In occupied Norway, the Bor-Hvidt group assembled weapons completely from scratch. They relied on a single parachuted original as their only structural blueprint. Warsaw insurgents went even further. They proudly stamped their illegal copies with the defiant Polish eagle, rivaling the original British manufacturing quality. The true irony lay in the daily logistics of close combat. Listen closely to the sharp metallic clank of a captured German cartridge. A 9mm parabellum round fits perfectly into the rough steel magazine of a Polish counterfeit. Stolen bullets found new targets. The invaders were literally supplying the ammunition for the exact weapons used to kill them. Why would the commander who rescued Mussolini abandon a benchmark German submachine gun? Otto Skorzeny evaluated his options in actual combat and chose the reliable functionality of a primitive design. Even the most fanatic elite of the SS faced a reality where a welded water pipe proved more dependable than rigid German standards. The sophisticated mechanism of the standard German weapon jammed constantly in dirty field conditions. Skorzeny left his jammed firearm behind and staked his survival entirely on a crude British alternative. The mechanical simplicity offered a profound tactical advantage for infantry mobility. Each unloaded weapon weighed just 3.2 kilograms. A soldier burdened with over 12 kilograms could bear 4 British submachine guns instead of one heavy American model. At 550 rounds per minute, this cheap proliferation provided overwhelming firepower during the battles of 1944. The strategic disparity becomes obvious when analyzing macroeconomic production figures. Germany managed to assemble 1.1 million complex submachine guns. Britain suffocated that effort by manufacturing 4.5 million of these crude barrels. Elite engineers built flawless rifles. Now they forged cheap pipes. Perfection died here. A $10 replica became their absolute top manufacturing priority. This bitter paradox deeply haunted the engineers at Mauser. Their factories defined global excellence. Since 1811, they ruled. Then 1944 brought ruin. Air raid sirens wailed loudly over the damaged factory. Craftsmen worked in sheer panic. They faced a humiliating task. Bombs rained upon German cities. The desperate high command demanded exact fakes without delay. Masters hammered fake British marks. They stamped the Potsdam device. Pride shattered completely. The absurd reality of their desperate situation struck hard. Engineers abandoned their strict standards. They embraced crude metal tubes. Genius served pure madness. Millimeter precision lost all meaning within these crumbling walls. Survival required mass weapon production. The original cost $10. Copies drained elite resources. Shrinking supply lines strangled the once mighty industrial giant. Raw materials vanished very quickly. Logistics collapsed completely. They copied the Sten Mark II. The crude enemy design proved superior for mass production. German engineers swallowed their pride. They admitted their own failure. Desperation replaced mechanical perfection. They ordered the MP 3008 without hesitation. A people's machine pistol emerged. The magazine fed from below. Otherwise, the resemblance was exact. They armed the desperate militia with these cheap copies. The people's militia absorbed these weapons. Old men grabbed these guns. Hope vanished fast. Young boys held them tightly during the final battles. They were untrained and scared. 10,000 units left Oberndorf. It was a massive collapse. May 1945 approached fast with inevitable total ruin. Time ran out for everyone. The numbers proved totally useless. Everything fell apart. The Reich started their war with unmatched mechanical innovation. Their early weapons terrified Europe. They ended assembling plumbing pipes. Desperation drove every choice. Industry suffered an epic humiliation. The mighty war machine broke. Factory despair was merely a symptom. The true nightmare unfolded on the ground when these crude weapons reached hands that never should have fought. How did the Polish underground acquire thousands of automatic weapons? German patrols faced this scrap metal not in frontline combat, but in dark alleys where partisans executed them point blank. The Special Operations Executive parachuted tens of thousands of Stens across Europe, yet the true humiliation emerged from hidden cellars. Deep in dim workshops, resistance fighters assembled lethal submachine guns from discarded bicycle parts. The heavy metallic clank of a rough bolt sliding inside a cheap steel tube signaled another dead occupier. By 1944, the Polish Home Army counted 400,000 members demanding cheap mass firepower. Over 2,000 copies flooded the streets, proudly bearing a forged English stamp and a Polish eagle to deceive inspectors. The mighty occupation army stood powerless against artisanal weapons hammered out of basic plumbing pipes. This clandestine production proved so devastating that it forced a final, bitter concession. In late 1944, the Germans began copying the weapon themselves. The partisan nightmare soon bled onto the front lines. In September 1944, Major Erich May and his paratroopers barricaded inside a two-story Arnhem schoolhouse. 60 German soldiers surrounded them. They expected an easy sweep. They found pure claustrophobia. Grenades dropped from the windows before the ambush erupted. The high-pitched rattle of Stens slammed through narrow, smoke-filled corridors. Deafening echoes battered the ears of trapped German infantrymen. Their superior numbers meant nothing in this confined space. British paratroopers fired captured 9mm German ammunition right back at them. 14 submachine guns unleashed this crushing fire. Victory cost about 40 pounds. How did 40 pounds break Wehrmacht tactics? They allowed the British Army to issue 3 or 4 automatic weapons to an infantry section, facing an enemy holding only one. The chaotic reality of urban combat exposed a fatal structural flaw in German military doctrine. The standard German 10-man infantry squad was built entirely around a single machine gun, leaving the remaining riflemen mostly in a support role. Only the squad commander carried an MP-40, meaning the rest relied entirely on their bolt-action rifles. British forces took a completely different approach, distributing the inexpensive Sten to sergeants, corporals, and most officers within an 8-man section. This mathematical shift dismantled the German reliance on centralized machine gun fire. Picture British paratroopers violently bursting into a confined room during a close-quarters assault. Sergeants and privates unleash automatic fire simultaneously, rapidly filling the enclosed space with the thick, choking scent of cordite. A lone German commander frantically attempts to return fire with his single MP-40, while his panicked infantrymen realize the complete uselessness of their slow rifles. Their established tactical doctrine crumbled under the sheer volume of lead pouring from every British soldier entering the space. This exact scenario played out near the Rhine River in late 1944. Lance Corporal Dennis Longmate of the Dorsetshire Regiment stumbled upon an unexpected German patrol at very close quarters. A rapid burst from his submachine gun settled the encounter before the enemy could even react. 1 million milled copies. Every single component of the German submachine gun bore official proof marks of military acceptance. This was a piece of complex engineering that demanded respect. Yet the inability to answer the sudden British barrage bred a burning hatred among German soldiers for the enemy's crude arsenal. The offended pride of the German craftsman soldier was deeply wounded. They harbored a profound disdain for this primitive lump of iron. Their own weapon represented the pinnacle of modern manufacturing. Over 1 million were produced between 1940 and 1945. Each one demanded 15 grueling hours of a skilled machinist's labor. It cost 3 times as much as its British counterpart to manufacture. German troops truly believed they carried a proper weapon worthy of an elite force. Seeing comrades cut down by inferior technology felt like a bitter insult. Then came the total industrial collapse of this elitist concept. A war of attrition demanded mass output over delicate perfection. The Sten required merely 5 hours of labor to assemble. Unskilled hands stamped it out in bicycle shops and kitchenware factories across Britain. A pressed steel tube, a spring, and a simple bolt. That was all it took. The Wehrmacht faced a tidal wave of cheap metal. This sudden influx broke the elite German concept completely. The old logic failed. A simple water pipe killed them. Why did Wehrmacht infantry march with 19th century rifles? Generals worshipped the ideal combat distance. They expected engagements over 100 meters. This blind arrogance started in 1941. Staff officers calculated perfectly clean battles. They drafted flawless paper combat scenarios. The rigid doctrine failed ordinary soldiers. Submachine guns were strictly elite tools. NCOs got them. Vehicle crews received the MP-40. Paratroopers wielded rapid automatic fire. Common foot soldiers suffered deeply. They carried the Carabiner 98K. Heavy lacquered wood froze completely solid. Cold stocks chilled their bare hands. It was useless. They died fast. Generals betrayed their own frontline men. Both weapons fired 9mm parabellum. The ammunition was exactly identical. German supply logic proved entirely fatal. The planners failed. Soldiers died clutching useless wooden stocks. Slow bolt actions killed infantrymen. Headquarters ignored mass cheap metal automation. They despised ugly stamped metal tubes. They trusted complex, expensive engineering. That trust cost thousands dearly. Nothing worked right. The British had to learn this tactical lesson at the cost of the crushing defeat of their own army. How do you dismantle the Nazi hierarchy in the Czech Republic? With a shot from a cheap metal tube on a street in Prague. The rigid German system suffered its first irreparable fracture not in massive battles, but on that blood-drenched pavement on the 27th of May, 1942. At 10:32 in the morning, Josef Gabčík waited for a green Mercedes 320 Cabriolet to round a tight bend. Inside sat Reinhard Heydrich, the principal architect of the Holocaust. The most powerful man in occupied Europe stood in stark contrast to a cheap tube of welded metal. As the target closed the distance to a mere 8 feet, Gabčík dropped his raincoat and raised his Sten. He pulled the trigger, but only a dull metallic click of a jammed bolt echoed through the silence. The fate of the Reich's chief executioner hinged entirely on the quality of a stamped steel pipe, and that weapon completely failed. Because of this catastrophic misfire, the operative was forced to hurl a grenade at the vehicle instead. Reinhard Heydrich ultimately died 8 days after the attack from severe sepsis caused by the shrapnel. The official weapon of the British Empire looked like a plumber's homemade pipe, yet it fired captured 9mm parabellum rounds from German submachine guns. The firearm that betrayed the assassin in Prague was born of sheer desperation. It was a crude mechanism. Workers welded pressed steel tubes. Engineers eliminated all wooden furniture and discarded heavy flash suppressors to streamline the entire process. The bolt and barrel remained the only components requiring actual precision machining. Industrial spaces smelled sharply of scorched metal and hot grease. These exact same assembly lines had been manufacturing ordinary kitchenware just 1 year prior. The goal was extreme cheapness. They needed millions, fast. This stripped-down frame weighed exactly 3.2 kilograms unloaded. Production costs plummeted to 2 pounds and 17 shillings, or roughly $10. An imported Thompson submachine gun cost $70. That was 7 times the price of this primitive domestic alternative. The British Empire desperately needed sheer numbers. Civilian laborers delivered them on a massive scale. 4.5 million submachine guns eventually rolled off these hastily converted assembly lines. The final contrast in production labor was structurally staggering. A finely crafted Thompson required over 100 hours of intense manufacturing time. A Sten took just 5.5 hours to build. How do you arm an army in a month? Lock yourselves inside a radio factory workshop. It took 36 days for Harold Turpin and Reginald Shepard to assemble a prototype on the Philco Radio Works production lines. Those millions of cheap metal tubes essentially began with that desperate blueprint drafted by 2 engineers in Middlesex. Before this forced innovation, the War Office had ordered 50,000 copies of the German MP-28. That heavy Lanchester design was 12 years out of date, yet the military accepted it through desperation. During official trials in January 1941, their creation fired 5,400 rounds without a single mechanical failure. The new mechanism was rudimentary, but it provided the critical firepower that the British Army desperately lacked. The military establishment officially adopted the weapon for service on the 7th of March 1941. 11,000 machine guns lay abandoned on the beaches of northern France. Turpin's frantic rush to design a new mechanism in January of 1941 stemmed entirely from the crushing defeat of the previous summer. The British forces survived Dunkirk. Operation Dynamo successfully evacuated 338,000 soldiers across the Channel. The men came home. The weapons did not. Troops dropped their entire arsenal on the shore to board the rescue ships. The disaster in the summer of 1940 cost the military 11,000 machine guns. 75,000 tons of ammunition remained on the continent. Tens of thousands of standard Lee-Enfield rifles were lost forever. The British command faced a harsh reality. Their regular army was completely disarmed. Before this collapse, military leaders never truly believed in submachine guns. They trusted traditional bolt-action rifles to defend the empire. Now they desperately needed automatic firepower for close combat. They had absolutely nothing. The frantic creation of cheap metal tubes was the only way to arm surviving battalions quickly. Reinhard Heydrich ultimately bled out from a crude metal pipe in Prague. He died because 2 years earlier, an entire empire left 11,000 factory weapons sinking into the French sand.